All right, so there is a faster way to determine if your circuit will blow with only one calculation. You don't have to calculate current at all. So I drew the same diagram we had before: 15 amp switch, 800 watt microwave, 400 watt refrigerator, 1100 watt toaster. Now I want you to copy down the definition of a load limit. In engineering, a load is how much weight a bridge or a structure can carry, okay? But in electricity, it's very similar. Instead of how much weight something can carry, it's just how much watts it could carry before the circuit breaker trips, okay? So you keep plugging more stuff in, that's more watts. Eventually, it's too many watts and it goes over something called the load limit, which is really a number of watts, okay? It's a maximum number of watts that can be plugged in or allowed on without tripping the circuit breaker. So eventually, if you plug in too many watts, it goes over this number for watts called the load limit. So the load limit, it's a power, okay? So in this formula, we're going to calculate load limit. Load limit is P, okay? Once you go over that number for P with the stuff you have plugged in, then if you add up all the watts that's plugged in and it goes over that number for P, then the circuit breaker trips. And that's, instead of going over the switch rating, it's going over the number for watts, okay? Now, how do we calculate the load limit? It's V times I, okay? V is always going to be our household voltage, 120 volts, and I is the maximum number of amps that we're allowed, which is the switch rating, okay? So here we have a 15 amp switch, so I'm going to calculate load limit. Load limit is P. So I'm going to use P equals VI, 120 for volts, and I is going to be 15 amps because that's what our switch is. So the load limit, when you multiply those two, you get 1800 watts. So that's the max watts allowed plugged in. That's what the load limit is, okay? It's the max watts you're allowed to plug in before you trip the circuit breaker, okay? All right, so our question would be, what combos could we plug in without tripping the circuit breaker? What combination of these three? Well, if I do, let's test the toaster and refrigerator. The biggest and the smallest one. Can you plug those two in? The 1100 watts plus 400 watts equals 1500 watts. Toaster's 1100, refrigerator's 400. Add those up and you get 1500. Does that go over the load limit? No, it doesn't exceed load limit. It doesn't exceed load limit, so it stays on. Woohoo! So toaster and refrigerator are good. All right, let's try another one. Let's go toaster and the second biggest device, toaster and microwave. Can you plug those two in and the circuit stays on? Toaster is 1100 watts and microwave is 800 watts. And when you plug those two in together, you add them up and you get 1900 watts. Does that exceed the load limit? Oh, the load limit was 1800 watts. So it exceeds it. 1900 is greater than 1800. It exceeds load limit, so turns off. My sad face. That's okay. So those two, 1900 was greater than our load limit of 1800, so those two will turn off.